Proud to Sign Jewish is the name of this event. I am from the Jewish Heritage Program. That's my internship. So I planned this event with Rachel. Rachel, would you like to say anything?
I'm Rachel, and I'm representing Hillel, and so we planned this together with a lot of help from you. And the study program and associated. So we're really excited because we've been looking forward to this and planning this for a long time, and we're excited it's finally happening.
We'll have food after the panel, and you can socialize.
And then next week, we're doing a holiday. So if you'd like to join us there, that's going to be on the 7th at 6:30. So, and if you have any questions about Jewish life or anything, feel free to come to us. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. You are very brave to come here in the rain and walk through the puddles to get here. You are very brave. I drove all the way from, I work, but was coming from work. It's pouring down rain. How many students were going to come tonight? I am shocked to see so many of you show up here tonight. I am really impressed that you came out in this weather. My name is Fred Hartman. I'm going to be your moderator tonight for the panel. People will introduce themselves. I grew up Jewish. I grew up Reform, not strong Jewish, but Reform. As each panelist introduces themselves, I'm going to ask some questions of them, and then I will insert some of my own thoughts. Are you ready for the questions? Okay. Here we go. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves, start with your name. Would you prefer to stand up so people can all see you? If you don't mind to stand up. Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Kaplan. I grew up modern Orthodox in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you. Hello, my name is David Michalowski. I grew up in Chicago, moved to New York City to go to NYU, graduated, went to RIT. I've been in Baltimore since 2001. My wife and I have 3 children, and all of our children are hearing. That's enough.
Good evening. He talks too much. Be careful. He's got a lot to say and share with all of you tonight. My name is Connie Friedman from Baltimore. I wasn't born, didn't grow up in Baltimore, but I live here more than 23 years of my life so I feel connected to Baltimore. 2/3 of my life. Hello, my name is Rabbi Fred Friedman from Baltimore. Connie is my wife. Thank you.
Great. I really appreciate you all coming tonight. If you don't mind to tell a little bit about growing up, your background. You know, what it was like, how did you identify yourself as deaf or Jewish? Which one was first or more important? Can you talk a little bit about your school? Were you mainstreamed? Did you go to a Jewish school? Can you expand on your growing up experiences? I grew up at an Orthodox school, Beis Yaakov, for 14 years. I went to that school till 12th grade. I did not have an interpreter or anything. What was the question again? Growing up in school, then after that, what did you do after school? Did you go to college? Yeah. I went to art college. I did have an interpreter. I did not have an interpreter in art college.
She didn't have an interpreter in Base
Did
Yaakov.
not have an interpreter at Base Yaakov, but did have an interpreter at college, at Art College. I was really impressed to have an interpreter come to my class and everything. You know, I was paying for that school. I wanted to make sure I was able to learn a lot through the interpreter. After I graduated college, I got a job right away. A few months later, I got a job right away. I was a design major. Got a job, didn't have any trouble with hearing people. I worked for the company, had to work with hearing people all the time, didn't have a problem. I just needed people to speak slowly and communicate clearly. Oh, I'm going to turn my voice off, sorry. Okay, that's enough. My parents are deaf, so I signed all the time at home growing up. My grandparents are hearing, and they forbid signing at home, but we didn't care at my house. We signed all the time with our parents. So I learned to use my voice also, but I had a good, growing up, a good experience. My parents are Catholic. I was born in Chicago, and I have a sister and a brother and a sister, and we found out recently that my parents had deaf heritage. And so I grew up Catholic. Later, I found out that my mother was actually 3 generations ago was Jewish from Poland. But I hadn't known that. When I met my wife, she was Jewish. We met at NYU in college. And we got married, and I converted to Judaism, and I became Orthodox. My wife grew up Orthodox. We were not Hasidic, but we had many relatives who came from Israel for the wedding. We went to RIT. I got a master's degree in graphic design. I have 3 children. All 3 of my children are hearing. They all went to private Jewish schools growing up. My kids never went to public school. All private schools didn't work. And I own my own graphic design business, which I've owned for over 20 years.
Anyone who sends their kids to private school is always broke. That's a fact of life. It doesn't matter how much money you make. I grew up just like Michael. Didn't grow up Jewish. My parents are not religious. Nothing. But I was little. I went to Sunday school with the neighbors. Can I join you? I would see them. I'd say, can I go with you? My mother would say, why not? Go ahead. She never stopped me from going to Sunday school. Then, when I was 11, I was in public school. At 11, I went into deaf school. So I was in public school till 11. And deaf school was the most amazing years of my life, the deaf school. And went to college, went to Gallaudet, met my husband, and the rest is history. Oregon school?
Went to the Oregon school. Do you know Sam Sapala? Yes, but he's older than me.
Maybe she's saying all my whole life story. That's it. What about your life story? I can't
run for president.
I can't run for president of the United States
because I'm a naturalized.
Because I'm a naturalized citizen. My mother and father got married in Europe. I was born there. 2 years later, 2.5 years later, we moved to America. And my aunt, a relative of my father's side, until my father found a job in New Jersey. At first we stayed in New York for a short time, went to Lexington School for the Deaf in New York. Then my father found a job in New Jersey. New York found out that my father worked in New Jersey, and my mother lived in New Jersey, and they kicked me out of Lexington. So I moved to New Jersey School for the Deaf in New Jersey. And I stayed there, I guess, beginning at age 3 till 17. Then I graduated. Then I went right away to Gallaudet. And Gallaudet, after I finished, I majored in psychology, political science, and worked for the Library of Congress. When I was working part-time at the Library of Congress, That's how I met her. Somewhere, Gallaudet, on Gallaudet campus. So we have 5 children, all went to private Jewish school, and we are still broke. And I'm more broke than he is. Now, 4 kids are married. They're all hearing, all 5 children are hearing. 4 are married. Now I have 18 grandchildren. They're all hearing. So, one isn't married yet. Shortly, I think. I'll be the first to know. No, you'll be the second, is what I said. You'll be the second to know. I'm retired from the Library of Congress, but I'm still working with the Deaf Jewish Community of America.
Wow. I'd like to add a little bit about my experience growing up. I was born in Connecticut. My father was from New York, and my mother was from Massachusetts, from Boston. So they met in the middle. They decided to live halfway in Connecticut. That's why I was born and raised in Connecticut. I went to school in Massachusetts and had to commute 2 hours. I came home on the weekends. I went to an oral school. Was it the Clark School? Yes, it was the Clark School. Yes, it was the Clark School. I did not know anything about sign language until I was 18 years old. I didn't know anything. And I just tried to get by in a hearing school. There was no interpreter, trying to read people's lips. I did not understand a very high percentage. I made a lot of assumptions and guesswork and looked at other people's papers and just tried to get by. Graduated by the skin of my teeth. And when I finally went into NTID, RIT, like David mentioned, I woke up and realized there was a whole other world out there. There were deaf people. I had a deaf roommate who used ASL. I was oral. We tried to communicate. We were like the odd couple. One person was clean, one person was dirty, one person was oral, one person was a signer. So I was like mouthing to him, "Can you move this here?" And he was signing back to me, and I would say, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand you." It really was a problem because I didn't know sign. But I picked it up eventually and became a skilled signer. So that's a little bit about my background. Okay. Looking at my questions, can you share a little bit about your story about being Jewish and deaf? What's your experience about being Jewish and deaf in your life? Any story that you really want to share with the group? Anything you can tell? Whoever wants to start.
Well, I'm sure that most of you are not Jewish. Is that, do I understand? But we're all people. Deaf and Jewish. There's a big dilemma. Like to say you can't split a hair. Can't split a hair with a razor blade. You're born Jewish, you find out later you're deaf, you have 2 in 1. You can't separate them. So, I grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey. So it's an important town, Jewish community. I grew up Orthodox, went to shul every Shabbos, every weekend I went home, so I went to shul most of the time. Synagogue. I was the only deaf one in that town. Maybe 2. He wasn't Jewish, I was Jewish. We went to the same school. And the deaf Jewish culture is different from deaf culture. If you look inside, or you're used to having, you feel like you have 2 heads. The Jewish culture, well, they keep Shabbat. They Jewish food, different behaviors, more civil. More civil. Deaf culture is a little different. Nothing like this. Deaf culture, it's easy to mix. You can mix with anybody and communicate with anybody. Remember, my home, growing up in New Jersey, we did not use any sign at home. My mother and father didn't know any sign. but I understood my father easily. I could read his lips. I had a speech teacher at the deaf school. Imagine, I had a speech teacher at the deaf school, private classes. So I sat with a speech teacher. I would use a tissue, we would blow on it for pee, and anyway, at the deaf school, I used sign language most of the time. So it was like 2 in 1. It was a big challenge for all of us.
I have a question. You said about being oral, and you said Jewish culture is a little different, which I understand. So are you saying that you learn Torah by going to synagogue on Saturdays? Like, how did you learn Torah?
Let me see, how did I learn? I went to Jewish school every Sunday in Lakewood. So I was still oral, I was still trying to learn, read their lips, Hebrew letters, like ABC. I would try to connect it, try to memorize it, connect it to Hebrew. At deaf school, I was learning ABC. So, I don't know, praying. I have an English sitter prayer book. I was always looking, trying to, like a prize, like finding a prayer book that had English in it. What did I do when I got older? When I could read? I was about 9 when I could read Hebrew. Before that, I couldn't read. After 9, I could start reading. I would go maybe 7, 8, 9. I would just sit and play with other kids. Till I was older, then I learned how to read. And I could sit and read English and Hebrew. Thank you.
I went to the deaf school. What kind of Jewish education did you get at the deaf school? I'll hold. That's an important question, so thank you. But do any of you want to share your experiences about being Jewish and deaf?
Woman first. Okay. Me, I lived in different stages of my life. First, 11 years, I was in public school. I was deaf. Was I deaf? No, I was hard of hearing. I found out that I lost hearing when I was 2, but they did nothing about it because I was able to communicate with the family. Then I came from a family of 6 children, and they were loud and active. So I was able to, pick up things and what they were talking about. My mother always made sure that I was involved, what was happening. I didn't feel different. I didn't feel like I was living out of this. I was living among 8 families. And there was a strong Catholic community. My parents were not religious. And I had a large family, remember. It was 1940, there were no abortions, so we had big families. No birth control. So, got pregnant, what did you do? You went ahead and had the baby, and you had another one. Until, I guess time cut you off, I don't know. I didn't live through that. I was called post-war baby, born in 1947. And when I went into school, it was when it hit me. I realized I don't hear, because the teacher in school, she would be picking on me and punishing me. Why are you punishing me? Why? I didn't understand. Then she left. Then a new teacher came in January. And that teacher, she looked at me, she observed, she decided to give me a hearing test. It was a rough test, not, with all technology. It was she just had me sitting near a window, and she had the lights out, and she would say to me, stand behind me. And I would try to hear what I'm saying. And I would sit and sit and sit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I felt like it was 5 minutes. Maybe it was 2 minutes. I don't know. But the teacher said, fine, great job. And I looked at her and said, but you said nothing. And the teacher said, that's right, go and play. Something's not right here. Then in the moment, I realized I couldn't hear me. My father called. And I got a call from my father, and I tried to talk to my father, and I realized, what? What are you saying over and over again? I kept saying, what? So finally, my brother came over, and she said, my father wants to know if you want to go fishing tomorrow. And he said, really? I couldn't hear that. I was shocked. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. I was in shock, and I never got on the phone again. Never again. For years and years and years. I knew that I couldn't hear then, and it hit me. So I tried to go through public school, tried to progress, tried to go forward. 5th grade, my parents found out about the deaf school. And we asked a lot of questions, and they came, we had an interview, yes, we'll accept me. And then at that time, they didn't have any cutoff about amount of hearing that you had, like a cutoff with the amount of hearing that you had, that you couldn't go into the deaf school. They didn't have that anymore. A long time ago, they didn't have that anymore. There was no criteria. If you had any hearing loss, you could come to the deaf school. If I applied today, they probably would say no, that you have too much hearing. Even though I have a profound deaf loss. So they figured with the hearing aid, it would help. And it does help. But it doesn't count how much I would get from a language group, from a lecture, from a discussion group. I'm lost. They don't put that into account when they decide whether to accept a child into a program or a deaf school or not. So it hit me. I got into the deaf school. I was 11 years old, and it changed my life. It changed. I got in like him. It was like 8 girls in a room. It was a big like this, 8 beds, and I'm looking around, and my mother put away all my clothes, yes, and the girls were like, come on. And they were saying, come, this is your bed. And the girl said, this is your bed. This is your bed. Oh, wow. And from then on, I just started learning and learning. I just kept learning and learning. I was so happy. I felt like I had frog eyes because I was always just looking and looking and looking at everything. Watching the teacher sign, talking, watching, observing, watching all the time. After 1 year, I became brave enough to try signing. And I got it, and I went back to public school, never again.
What Rabbi Fred said, that deaf culture and Jewish culture are very different, but they are similar because of networking. The deaf community, you might have friends from school, you know a lot of people, the same background, you grew up, you know. One thing I've noticed, the Jewish community is very similar, just like the deaf community. So, like my children grew up, they have friends in Baltimore, friends in New York. My daughter married a guy who knew my other daughter's friends from school. It's a very small world. So people knew each other between New York City and Baltimore. It's really the Jewish world is very small. It's a very small world. So the deaf world and the Jewish world are similar in that way. I'll make it short. Deaf culture and Jewish culture are about the same, like the other people said. I grew up Jewish and deaf. My parents didn't know I was deaf till I was about 2 months old. My parents, both being deaf, they weren't so concerned about doing the hearing test. Today they would have done it right away, but parents back then weren't so concerned about a hearing test. My parents would clap their hands and see if I would look up. They would make a noise, see if I would look up. They would speak, and I wasn't looking up. They noticed that I wasn't responding to sound, with bangs, and sometimes I would look up, sometimes I didn't, particularly not with speech. So they decided I was hard of hearing, that I might be able to hear loud noises, especially with the use of a hearing aid. my parents wanted me to go to a deaf school, but my grandparents said no. My grandmother said, no, you should go to a hearing school. So they put me in a hearing school. But everything just went right over my head. And I had private tutors, and Esther met me. I had Esther as a tutor, I think, for a while. And I had that tutoring. I learned Hebrew and English growing up. I learned how to read Hebrew and English. Because my parents were deaf, they would always invite deaf friends to come to our house, so I would learn sign from them, and I would sign all the time from the exposure to them. I learned Hebrew and English language both. So both Jewish and deaf are ingrained within me. Thank you very much. So I'll tell you a little bit about my answer. I grew up Reform, which means not real strong Jewish, but yes, strong with culture. Food. Food is my thing. My family is always thinking about food, big piles of food. And dessert. Dessert is very important to them. That's part of the culture. So I would call myself Jewish, but when I met my wife, who is not Jewish, we agreed on a compromise. She would stay with her religion, which is Protestant, and I would stay with mine, which is Jewish. And we joined like an interfaith environment. So I would continue to identify as Jewish, but we were both strongly deaf. And we agreed that we would raise our children Jewish. And I bless my wife for that. Now understand that this was a compromise, because a tree, like a Christmas tree. She wanted a tree with lights, with Hanukkah things hanging on the tree. She wanted the tree with Hanukkah things. So I said, okay, we shook hands, we agreed. We didn't really sign a contract, but we agreed on that compromise. So we get to have a tree, but my wife grew up with a Christmas tree for many years, but I was kind of excited. Like, next week I'm going to open the box and set up the tree, and on the top of the tree we're going to put a menorah. We're going to put a menorah at the top of the tree, and I'm kind of excited, like a little boy, because I never had a tree growing up when I was a Jewish kid. So I feel a little bit like half and half, because like I have a tree. All right, can you share with us a little bit about your experience about autism, like oppression? Briefly, any experiences where you feel oppressed? Maybe something happened to you as a deaf person, not so much as Jewish, but maybe anything that happened that was an oppressing situation, an experience that you could share with us.
I can say three things, three specific times. One, what happened very, very, very recently. I went to Johns Hopkins University I wanted to take get a new hearing aid, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting in the waiting room, and the audiologist, she knew I came, right? She knew I was here for a hearing aid. She knew I was having problems with my hearing aid, right? I'm sitting, waiting and waiting, half an hour. Finally, I'm the last person in the room. And I'm sitting, and she walks in, she talks, Mrs. Friedman. I didn't respond, and she left. I said, wait a minute, who do you want? I want Mrs. Friedman. Well, that's me. Why didn't you look at me? Make sure that I could understand. Johns Hopkins University, come on. That was the second one. Second time, I was in another audiologist office here in Baltimore, and I go to that man. I've been there many years. One day we're talking, he says to me, I'm going to a conference for hearing aids in Frederick, Maryland, or audiologists in Frederick, Maryland. Are you going to help kids in the Maryland School for the Deaf? He said, no way. I don't work with those kind of people. What? Excuse me? I'm one of those kind of people. Imagine facing that. I was very upset. But I kept my cool. I said, come on. You don't know about these little children. They're growing up. You don't know what they can be. They need hearing aids. Maybe they'll give you business. I don't want to help those kind of people. It was hard. The third one, I kind of forgot. It'll come back to me later.
Honestly,
Autism.
the word autism, really, the way I grew up,
Autism people.
there was a lot of emotion involved with autism. To me, it wasn't such a big deal. Why? I don't get angry over a lot of things, big or small, but I have been through some experiences that I just can't overlook. There are many things, you know, one or two little negative things, but there's so many positive things. I try and look at the positive. I try not to think about the negative. It doesn't work for me to focus on the negative. I know people have been through negative, bitter experiences. They have that ingrained in their mind. I just try and let it go, let it go, let it go. That's just my personality. I agree with you. That's what I was going to say. I feel like deaf people, they say, I want this, I want this, I want this. But you have interpreters, you have video relay, you have all different kinds of opportunities. People want more and more and more. They want a job, I want this and that. So don't be a crybaby. I wanted to say, when I was growing up, my grandmother didn't want me to go to a deaf school because she wanted me to be able to use my speech and my voice. Even though she knew I was deaf, she wanted me to have good speech for the future. She wanted me to be able to communicate in the future. So I felt like that hearing people were always going to have to help me if I wasn't able to help myself. But I do have a job today. I have a good life. I'm not dependent on, I interact with the hearing world, but I'm not dependent on people to help me. Once in a while I do use interpreters. But I can do things. Deaf people can do things. I don't have to ask for a million things. So, I guess there is some oppression, but I can do things in my life.
Okay, so it's about autism. So in my time, before you were born, in Lakewood, New Jersey, I didn't have any problems because my father was the foreman of the bakery. So I started working when I was 13 to help support the family. So I didn't have any problem. I understood my father. But when I went to Gallaudet, I started looking for a part-time job in college during my college years, and I felt a little bit of autism here and there because DC, that whole area, the whole town knows about Gallaudet, but you still have to plug away. It's not like today. There's not technology and video. There was nothing. If you had to apply, you handed in your form. I didn't hear from any for 2 or 3 weeks, so I went in and I bothered them again. He said, you needed people. I haven't heard from you in 2 or 3 weeks. So finally, in November, December, January, 3 months, almost every week, there was a job in February. I didn't understand. There was no interpreter. There was no interpreter working on the bottom floor as a clerk until the times were changing. At Gallaudet, I started working 1967 till I retired 8 years ago. There are a lot of changes. But through the years, I would have interviews for better jobs. I would go to interviews for better jobs, go to the library, try to take advanced courses so I could advance. People still sort of hesitated when they saw a deaf person. So until they bring an interpreter in, then there was a big breakthrough. So autism is still around today. I don't have experience now, but it's still around.
I want to add something to that. Everybody has their own individual experiences. Some people feel autism's no big thing, and other people think it's a real serious oppression. And I've shared stories with many of my friends, and they've shared stories with me, even within their families. When the big family gets together and everybody's talking, and somebody says, hey, what are you talking about? And what do they say? Never mind. Never mind, never mind. Later, I'll tell you later. How does that make a person feel? That's autism, that's oppression. I want to know what you're laughing about. Later, I'll tell you later. And Connie says,
Right, exactly.
And at that moment, that just happens so many times. I work for the government. When I'm working for the government, there are many deaf people who try and move up. And I see them working hard. They work their asses off. They work hard. And then the people who sit right next to them are moving up, but those people are not moving up.
Yes.
They apply for promotions. The weight of the promotion, they've met all of the criteria. They say, I'm the best qualified. What is it? BQ, best qualified person. That's a governmentese. But they say, yes, I've met everything, but then, the position is closed, or they give some vague answer. The poor deaf person is like, hello, is that autism? Is that oppression?
Yes.
Now, my agency lost. There was one deaf guy who sued my agency for autism. It took years of him trying to break through, and he finally won. It was a big lawsuit. And now my agency is like, okay, we have to do everything equally. So autism is still around today. And I know that some people say, it's no big deal. But for other people, I got to tell you, it's a very frustrating part of their lives. People don't like to be babied like that. I want to add about that word autism. I say it's discrimination. Autism and discrimination. I say you have a right to sue because that's discrimination. Autism, I think, is different. You don't have the opportunity to fix people who are ignorant. It's about rights, having a right or not having a right. Okay. That's a good suggestion. All right. Autism, discrimination aside, let's talk about your experiences. Have you experienced any anti-Semitism? Anyone experienced any anti-Semitism?
Yes, I have. So it's interesting. Anti-Semitism depends where you live or which school you go to. I had many friends from New York.
Went to
Fanwood. Fanwood. More than 3 or 4 Jewish schools in New Jersey, deaf schools in New Jersey. When my friends from New York went to Fanwood, there were tons of people anti-Semitism. In Lakewood, New Jersey, they felt like there were a lot of anti-Semitism. When I went to Gallaudet, there was no anti-Semitism. Why? There are a lot of Jewish deaf people there from the United States, a lot from New York, California. They all came in, Chicago. Interesting. Depends on which schools you went to, where you lived.
I've experienced anti-Semitism. It's not a new thing. There's been an increase, but the media has ignored things for many years. But I've seen a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of new growth, especially with Trump, which I don't want to get into. But I'll tell you, my son, when he was younger, when he was like 8 or 9, he was walking to Temple one day. Cars were going by, and my son said, "Dad, what does kike mean?" And I said, "Who said that?" And he said that there was a man driving by who screamed out the window, "Kike," which I didn't hear because I'm deaf. But I guess, we were dressed like Jews, and my son heard the word. And I hugged my son, and I said, "You have to be brave. That's what you have to, it's reality. You have to be brave. You have to grow up. You have to be strong. You have to be wise." But at the same time, there are some people who wear a yarmulke, a kippah on their head. They won't take it off. In public, they may wear a hat so that nobody will be able to see that they have that sign of Judaism on their head. If you can't hear, it can be a big problem. And Jody is asking, what does that word mean? Kike, K-I-K-E. It's a very negative word. It's like the N-word for black people. Jody says, okay. It's very degrading, David says.
I forgot
Leah says it happened to me also. I've seen a few deaf people use the word Jewish in their sentence, but they might mean it as an insult. They don't really mean it as an insult. They'll say like, oh, do you see that Jewish thing? Oh, that person has nice clothes or nice pants. Oh yeah, it's Jewish. Like, meaning nice. I'm like, wait a minute. It just happens that you like that clothing style or something. That doesn't mean anything related to Jewish. But people, I see them use that word Jewish. Often I'll see people, like if you go to a party and then you take a whole bunch of food on your plate, even if the person themselves isn't Jewish, then somebody else might look and say, oh, you Jew, like you got all that food on your plate. No, it's just, what do you do in a situation like that? I don't say anything, but when I see somebody use the word Jew or Jewish as an adjective, like takes too much food or something like that, I just feel like it's inappropriate, and sometimes I ignore them, or sometimes I'll say, that's not funny. And then the person will say, oh, I didn't really mean it that way. But still, I have to remind people that it's not nice. And it happens from time to time.
Yeah, let me add something. You have to be careful today, like Michael said, to ignore the media. David, sorry. Many people get a misinformation about Jewish people through the media, that Jewish people have money, or myths about Jewish people, they have a lot of money in the bank, or whatever. It's media twists. Media can twist anything they want, so be careful with that. It doesn't matter, they're religious.
Something similar. There was a famous Jewish basketball player, Ben Goldman from Baltimore. It's Tamar Goldman. Tamar Goodman. He played here for Towson University. He wore a kippah. He played basketball maybe about 10 years ago. And the game, the audience called him Jew, 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 and loud they would scream. And the coach did nothing. The players did nothing to support him. They did nothing. That happened right here at Towson University. I was surprised. You may not have been aware of it, but it happened. And then he ended up moving to Israel and joining a professional basketball team in Israel. I just thought it would be interesting for you to know that. I'll add, my father told me a story. He went to Germany one time. He was with a tour group. They were looking at, the tour group was Jewish and non-Jewish mixed. But my father wanted to change money from American money to German money. And he stood in the line and he went up to the teller. And they said, what's your name or whatever. And he said, my former last name was Weinstock. That was my maiden name, Weinstock. Weinstock's a very Jewish name and a German name. And my father said, my name is Weinstock. And, oh, Weinstock. He screamed it, the teller screamed it out loud. And my father was wearing a yarmulke at the time. He was a very brave man to wear the yarmulke out in public. And he screamed out the name of my father. And he said, F you. He said bad words. He said some bad sign language. He said, F you. And so it was very awkward, and we had to leave the bank. It was a very bad experience for him. My father just, well, your last name is Jewish. David is asking, what year did that happen? In the 1980s. I think it's time to open up for questions from the audience. Anything you're really curious about, feel free. And please stand up, and if you can sign it, and then or if you want to speak, the interpreters will sign for you. I think you were the first person.
Okay, so you all went to deaf school. Jewish options you had. When you look back, are you happy that you went to deaf school, or do you wish that maybe you had stayed, you missed something looking back? What's your question? Deaf school or Jewish school? Wait, when you were growing up, you went to deaf school, right? And your mother and father said no to a public school. Now you yourself, looking back, oh, do you feel like, shucks, I missed something? I don't want to, I don't know. I graduated deaf school.
If you had a choice, though, if you had a choice.
Kids can't make a choice.
High school, because I went to a hearing high school with no interpreter. That high school was where I graduated from in Chicago. And my freshman, sophomore, junior year. And then I transferred to a mainstream high school with an interpreter my senior year. And at that time, I wish that I had been in the school with the interpreters the whole time. Looking back, though, I'm thankful for that high school. Why? Because that high school helped me to get myself motivated to learn, to get through, to become more skilled. I feel like, if once I went to the school with the interpreters and more support, they spoon-fed me a little bit more. At the first school, I had to memorize more, I had to be challenged more, so I like that the first school, I went to that first high school, it forced me to become a good learner.
Wait, I have a question for David. Did you, in high school, did you have support services, tutors?
No,
Nothing. Your mother taught, was it your teacher?
No.
No, sometimes did she help you?
Yeah, but
Not my mother, but it was a hearing class that had like it was like a science, math class. They had like a teaching assistant who wrote everything down. Every night they would write down stuff for a couple of hours. For the first 3 years. My junior year was really tough, and that's when we decided I was going to transfer to a signing school because they realized that I needed to have interpreters in my class.
So you have to thank your mother at that time for writing and writing and writing every night for you for 2 hours, writing notes for you. Wow, I'm really impressed. Thank you.
In high school, I did not have an interpreter, right? Because I wanted to become an artist. And I did a lot of art, and I thought, oh, talking's not involved. I just didn't pay attention to the teacher. I just, I did my art. And sometimes I didn't understand what the teacher was saying, so I just did my art. And I just learned how to do art myself. And at that time in high school, I didn't really have much help. I probably had my areas of strength and weaknesses, but I got through, and I guess I had some helps like note takers. I had note takers. I read their notes. And sometimes I failed tests. I didn't care. I got through it. I graduated. But I wish that I had gone to a deaf school. In looking back, I wish I would have had a better experience. Being able to have friends and communicate with friends and other people. Going through school, I did learn how to talk, and having jobs, I've learned how to be more assertive. I can't just sit back and take it all in. I have to be happy that I went to a hearing school that gave me challenges and taught me to be stronger. Any other final questions anybody would like to ask? I think you're thinking about food. Are you already thinking about the food? Wait, we have the questions first, and then maybe I'm just going to add one more about, have any of you been to Israel?
Finish.
Oh yeah. How about you in the audience? Have you been to Israel? Ah, okay, that's good. That's a good number. Okay. Anybody not yet been? Me, I haven't been to Israel. It's shame on me. I sent my 2 kids to Israel. Go, but me, I haven't gone yet. I'm busy paying for college. When my kids are finished college, then it'll be my time to go to Israel. There's going to be a Jewish deaf group that's going to go together. And we're going to take off and go to Israel, and we're going to have a great time together.
It's worth it.
Question. What's your favorite Jewish food?
I don't know. It's a tough question. That's the hardest question of the night. Many different kinds. Maybe, did you ever hear like raw herring? Eating it from a jar? Cow's tongue? Sheep's brain? But cholent meat, cholent has potatoes and meat, kugel, noodle kugel, pickled meat,
Beets.
pickled beets, more, there's so much more. I'll tell you, 1950, Jewish food, what? Chicken and potatoes. In 1950, there was just chicken and potatoes. Even chicken feet, too. But today, chicken feet is illegal under the FDA. So anything like recently, anything new foods from Turkey, from Greek food, Spanish food, all different kinds. It can all be kosher today. So times have changed. You can get anything special, get everything kosher.
Two things. Beef brisket with red wine. My wife makes it delicious. That is the best. And also, 7-layer cake. Very famous. For Shabbat, for the Sabbath, for the 7 days, you have 7 layers of cake, and it's delicious. That's my favorite. That reminds me of Smith Island cake. Oh, here in Maryland, it's a very famous cake. It's from Smith Island. It has 8 or 9 layers, right? It's yellow cake, then chocolate, yellow chocolate, yellow chocolate, yellow chocolate. Is it the same kind of thing? Smith Island is here on the Eastern Shore.
Oh,
You're not familiar with it?
Never heard of it.
Oh, lox. Who knows lox? Lox. Woohoo! Go for lox. When I went to Boston for Thanksgiving last weekend, my cousin had smoked lox and regular lox. I ate it all.
Of course.
I just ate it
Of course.
all.
Of course.
I like your shirt.
I'll share with you. Before my husband introduced first thing about desserts, and we sat in a restaurant in Silver Spring. They don't have it there anymore. But we went and said it was delicious sandwiches. There was the best sandwich in the world. I said, really? We sat down outside, sat at a table outside, we looked at it. It was rye bread. Inside, what was in there? Cream cheese. It was just cream cheese. Cream cheese on rye. He loved that. That was his favorite sandwich. I looked at it and thought, lousy tasting. What? Cream cheese? Zero taste. He loved it. After that, he introduced me to more kind of Jewish foods. He didn't want cream cheese. I didn't want cream cheese until my first son was born. He was in the hospital. I was in the hospital. I was hungry. He was born at 5 a.m. I was like, come on, I'm hungry. And someone knocked and they they said, would you like some cream cheese and lox on a bagel? I said, no, I didn't ask for that, but I'll be happy to take it. And I looked at it and I tasted it. Lox. It was delicious. I took the cream cheese off and I just ate the lox. That's how I got to know lox.
Falafel. I love falafel, Israeli food. I make a lot of homemade food. I love my homemade food. Jane, did you describe what food you had?
Sure.
Okay, let's take one more question. Anybody in the back? The back, you guys are pretty quiet. Any more questions? Question. Trying to think of a question. Okay. I'm curious. I just came in a little late, so I don't know. Anybody's like strong Orthodox or whatever. But what about your kitchens? What do your kitchens look like? Do you have everything divided and separate or mixed, or how strictly kosher are your kitchens? The four of us all keep kosher kitchens, so we have separate dairy and meat kept separately. Yes. There's one refrigerator. Everything stays in the refrigerator. But we have 2 ovens, a meat and a dairy oven.
Cheesecake.
For like cheesecakes, lasagnas, they go in the separate oven. But for Passover, we have to take those ovens, the microwaves out and bring in a separate microwave because we don't want anything that's ever touched flour. And we use a lot of paper plates. For meat, we use nice dishes for Passover. When Passover week is finished, we move the microwave ovens out and bring it, so we have one that we use 51 weeks, 2 that we use 51 weeks a year, and 1 that we use the other week. So all of you, except me, I do not keep kosher. I just have a regular kitchen. Milk, dairy, meat, together, I put it all together. I'm a good Jew. What about the plates, all the forks? All of us, all of the 4 of them, I'm a little different. I'm a little bit different.
You're human.
So that was a very good question. Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about the food now? So first, I really want to thank the panelists for coming tonight, especially coming out in this rainy, gross weather and driving here. Really appreciate your stories. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we'll turn it over to the students.
Your voice for Jamie outside.
I'm just going to speak. Okay, so we have falafel and hummus, and if you guys don't know what that is, falafel is ground chickpeas fried in balls, and hummus is ground chickpeas like a sauce. I don't know how to explain it. And we have pita, so pita is the bread, and you can, if you want, you can put the hummus in the pita and then put the falafel in it and then eat it. It's great. And then we have 2 different kinds of kugel. We have apple kugel and potato kugel. We have barekas, which are potato in like a pastry. And we have grape juice to drink. We'd like to thank you all for coming, especially the panelists. And thank you, Fred, for moderating. And I hope everyone enjoys the food.
Wait, can we take some pictures of the panel?
Yeah.